everyone, how's it going? I'm finally coming around full circle to this game, and it's one that I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, one of From Software's entries that came after Dark Souls 3, which was the conclusion to the Souls trilogy, and would lead us to an uncertain future. When we first saw the teaser for their upcoming game, it was hard to discern what kind of game it was going to be. It wasn't much to work with, but after years of From Software cooking great and enjoyable titles since 2011, I was keen either way. And the reveal had me as excited as when they first showed Bloodborne, which I still think is the best game they've ever made. In any event, Sekiro since Bloodborne would be the next title in the From Software category to break from the Souls yoke, and create a combat system that would still provide the same level of challenge and player engagement that we would expect to see. From Software at this point had become the champions of the action RPG or hack and slash genre, creating a new standard for other games in those genres to aspire to. At the same time though, it also created a sense of tunnel vision for people where those genres couldn't be engaging and satisfying if they didn't have Souls-like combat. And, they weren't taking notes from those games. This also marked a dry landscape for the future of character-based action games like Devil May Cry or God of War or Ninja Gaiden. Sekiro, though, would not only be different from its Souls brethren, but would also bring forth an established character written and interwoven into the game's world. This meant no more character creation or stat allocation for build variety. Instead, we would walk in the shoes of a shinobi in a war-torn feudal Japan. Sekiro would release in 2019, becoming my personal game of the year and also housing my favorite combat in the entire From Software lineup so far. I've yet to play Armored Core 6, so I can't say how that one holds up yet, but it is on my list. Moving on, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice was lightning in the bottle for me. It felt initially familiar and yet felt like a different beast altogether. Revisiting it again as of late only solidified and confirmed this realization and gave me more to think about what it does differently and how it sets itself apart from the rest. This isn't really going to be a full-on review of the game, but more of a talk on my feelings towards the game's combat system and why I think it's so good. So let's get into it. The Souls games, including Elden Ring, have benefited from the large range of weapon types including magic and ranged weapons, and this has made those games highly replayable. They give you the flexibility to make it as hard or as easy as you want, but when you peel the layers, the combat in general is pretty basic. Some of the enemies and bosses have more attack variety, and some have even Tekken levels of combos as evidenced in the Elden Ring DLC. Your character has a rather limited moveset if you look at the weapons individually. The enjoyment of the Souls game's combat system in general is more in the strategic approach to handling each enemy and their unique mechanics, and not so much about making a complex library of attacks for the player to deploy like in Ninja Gaiden or Devil May Cry or God of War. Sekiro, however, dedicates itself to a playstyle built around the established character. Instead of being a jack of all trades, but master of none like in the Souls games, Sekiro opts to be really fucking good at one thing, and that is playing like a shinobi. Your fast and agile movement flows with the combat mechanics, and the pacing never gets in the way. Having only the one playstyle allowed From Software to give it the most love and attention, compounded with its harmony of parrying and deflecting, attacking and using equipment in what could be seen as a dance, and every enemy adheres to the sense of rhythm that's incredibly satisfying when it finally clicks. Consequentially though, this does mean that the game may not be for everyone. The people that like the Souls games for their build variety are gambling on the hope of it being enjoyable in the first place, but if it doesn't click for them, then there's nothing else they can do to go around its system. It's why a lot of people like the Souls games, because of the build variety that accommodates for different types of players. Sekiro has more verticality than any of the Elden Soulsborne games combined, using your equipment to grapple in and out to safety, going onto higher planes in the area, higher buildings, jumping over enemies using items or prosthetics for unique maneuvers in the arena. Its simple but hard to master approach to its systems gives the player opportunities to improve beyond just over-leveling or getting an OP build to steamroll the game. You use your movement, verticality, game sense and rhythm against your opponents to eventually triumph over them. Sekiro feels incredibly smooth, and it's reflected in its rhythmic combat flow. The buttery sense of movement and your speed moving together like puzzles that match. While I'm not the biggest stealth person, it works pretty well in the game and you are actively encouraged to utilize it. Being a shinobi also means working in the shadows and not thumping your chest like a guardian ape in front of every samurai in the Ashina clan to fight everyone. Fights are meant to be played to your favor. This means hurting the numbers, using guerrilla tactics, using your techniques, causing distractions whenever possible. But when you finally engage with the combat and set up a manageable duel, like in the boss fights, it's where the game truly shines. Your arsenal is unique and it ties into your prosthetic arm, giving yourself new weapons or new abilities on top of your main sword that can expose certain weaknesses. While it is possible to beat the game without ever using them, you're locking yourself out to not only another dimension to its combat system, but also a core mechanic that's intrinsically tied to the game's story. The more you experiment with the prosthetic system, the more you realize how much flexibility has been developed around the relatively simple combat with the sword, and we haven't even mentioned the combat arts and the ninjutsu techniques either, where one serves to give you a leg up before the fight begins, like with the puppeteer technique, or the cloud of smoke you can use for quick evasions, or another stealth kill. The combat arms is another layer to your main R1 attack, and throughout the game you discover and learn a number of them. One particular move that was added later, the Sakura dance, is fantastic against enemies and bosses with lightning attacks because if you time it right, you can deflect the lightning right back at them, significantly affecting their health and posture system. That's another thing that makes Sekiro's combat amazing, is the balance of aggressive and defensive combat. In other games, you can block and be defensive to your heart's content, but it's not getting you that much closer to defeating the enemy. And even if you manage to parry, you're gambling on punishable attacks and not everyone parries anyway. The other option is to attack, but you're always at the risk of hyper armor attacks or running out of stamina. You make more progress by being aggressive while respecting the enemy's reactions or get off me moves. And Sekiro does adhere to this to a degree as well, but where Sekiro shines is that even if you play aggressively or defensively, you're always making progress either way. And that's because of the deflection system and the posture bar. In Sekiro, your character and enemies have a health bar and a posture bar. The posture bar becomes the most important bar to manage because mistimed blocks makes it go up higher, and losing it puts you at great risk of taking a lot of damage with the next attack. The posture bar is technically like stamina, and both sides in the fight adhere to it. You fight, they block, deflect. They fight, you block and deflect. Both sides are filling up the posture meter. You just have to nail your parries more than they do. Parrying is a scary term for some people, and it's also the main reason why some people don't like Sekiro at all. But compared to the other From Software games with the parry system, this game is actually the most forgiving one, because even if you screw up, you still block the attack. You only just lose more of your posture, which doesn't matter too much once you've gotten a handle on the enemy's rhythm and timing. And while there are some attacks where you can still sustain damage after a block, it's not that much in the grand scheme of things, and you can still recover pretty quickly. The parrying isn't as tight time-wise as it is in a game like Lies of P, so even if it may seem like you're off, a lot of the time you're fine. When you don't engage with the enemy, the posture bars go down, taking you back to square one, which is why you must always keep at the enemy. It does encourage you to be more aggressive because you want to keep that posture bar going so then you can secure the death blow. This system is great because it does reward you for engaging with the enemy more and not being passive. The blows and the clashes are immensely satisfying in a way that makes me want more of it. Another quick point I want to address regarding the use of cheese or dirty tactics is how this game rewards the use of cheese and dirty tactics. The Souls games have a lot of this stuff in spades, but it's more for the sake of making the game much easier, and this is where the gatekeeping usually starts to materialize. Of course, in Sekiro there are ways to make the game easier, but contextually it makes sense to fight and play dirty with your opponents and to cheese them, and here's why. Sekiro in context is a shinobi trained in being deceptive and using any advantage discovered. And while he is trained in the arts of a samurai like a lot of ninjas were, his profession allows him to fight without the burden of honor. You can afford to fight and run like a coward, use smoke or trickery to fool enemies in the game. You can fight them like a samurai, of course, but you're only making the game harder this way, and multiple fights in Sekiro aren't particularly good. It's probably the biggest gripe I do actually have with the combat system, which is why you should be utilizing the stealth mechanics of the game to herd out the numbers when you're dealing with multiple groups of enemies. Like I said, you can fight like a samurai, but your character can do so much more than just fight with a sword, and it's only by the willingness to experiment with your equipment, your items, your abilities, your prosthetics, and by doing this, you can discover the multitudes of strategies that can be utilized. This is doubly the case in some of the game's mods, like in Long May the Shadows Reflect, where everything is masochistically difficult and unfair. Guess what? You can be unfair as well. You're not supposed to fight fair. You're supposed to be a fucking nuisance that won't die, and literally can't die because of the resurrection mechanic where you can get up again. Technically, you do die if you die again, but you just respawn at the last sculptor aisle and come back until they die. In any event, your prosthetic tools and items are there for your own personal benefit, and it's not the game's fault if you decide to ignore those mechanics and not engage with them. On the same token though, you do have the means to get by without using them too much, and you're never really punished for not using it due to your basic tools being enough to handle all the combat scenarios. Sure, use your basic tools and you do still get a fun action game with simple and enjoyable combat, but if you use everything the game offers, you get an amazing combat system with good stealth mechanics that play with the idea of being a badass shinobi really well. And one other thing that I really like about the game, and this is a bit of an eye roller, you have to actually get good at the game. This sounds really snobby, and you often hear get good or skill issue in the Souls community to an infuriating degree. It's why I never really engage with the Souls community much. But let me explain. The Souls games in general have many avenues to make the experience much easier, and some aspects of the game even lets you ignore certain mechanics. You have builds that can ignore certain mechanics entirely. You can get magic spells or builds that annihilate health in seconds, trivializing the challenge altogether for a lot of engagements. You can't really do that though in Sekiro because your flexibility is restricted to the setup of your character. Sekiro can't just whip out a Comet Azure spell and delete the boss's health in 2 seconds. You can of course still cheese, and there are some powerful arts, as well as the use of the Mortal Blade, that can make some fights easier, and there are always ways to cheese in Sekiro. But regardless, you are still generally forced to engage with all of the mechanics in the fights. And if you can't get a handle on the parrying based combat system, then you won't get very far. The build variety allows players to not have to engage with every mechanic, but in Sekiro, all of the mechanics are used. You're still parrying, attacking, using items and prosthetics. It's just a matter of which one's more useful and how much of it you use. In the Guardian Ape's second phase, you can use the loaded spear after it collapses. This is a weakness you can exploit every time the ape collapses after its large slam attack with the sword. You could say it's cheesing if you want, but like I've already said, Sekiro's combat is so tight and focused that you're always engaging with all of its important mechanics in one way or another, and again, your character is a shinobi that fights without the worry of honor, and it's in your own personal benefit to fight dirty and be unfair. And when you fight dirty in this game, you actually reach the peak of Sekiro's gameplay. Even still, you have to have a good handle on the game, even more so if you decide to start doing challenge runs. Fighting the bosses without any upgrades to your health, posture or attack power is extremely hard, even more so without any prosthetics or skills or Makiri counter. Is it still possible though? Of course, but you're going to be in for a rough ride and you're not really playing it in the most optimal way anymore. It's something that only the most masochistic players do to push themselves further, if that is what they want. And even then, they are still adhering to the main mechanics of Sekiro's combat, and it goes to show how well thought out it is and how well integrated it is. The enemies, the amazing bosses, all have you engaging with its design because they have the same rules as well. Also, you're not bound by a column of stats either, just 2. Your vitality and attack power, nothing more. The build variety from the Souls games that required more stats is sacrificed for stats that actually matter for your character's playstyle. Vitality increases your health and posture, letting you survive hits and mistimed blocks more. And attack power, making it even easier to drain their posture bar and health bar quicker. Even with Mortal Blade, Spirit Falls and other items to give your character a boost, even with cheese tactics, you still have to have a good handle on everything else before you can take advantage of those things. The game forces you to dance to its rhythms until you reach the flow state needed to succeed. In the Souls games, there are ways to completely bypass certain mechanics, and that is just an unfortunate symptom of build variety. Sekiro does away with that and challenges you to master each aspect. And when you do finally master it, there are even mods that add more mechanics to make the combat even more dynamic and flexible. For those that want mods that enhance the combat experience, like the Elden Arts mod or the Malevolence mod, new mechanics, combat arts, and techniques to make the game far richer in its variety of skills you can use, I would go towards using those mods and trying them out. The only other game that also forces you to actually get good at the game in the From Software library is Bloodborne, where you're limited to its combat style even with the amount of weapons available. Both games do an incredible job of making the player improve through its tight combat and its well thought out mechanics, rather than relying on broken builds that give the illusion of improvement just because you beat a boss easily. But out of the two, Sekiro does it the best in my opinion. There's a lot more that could be said, but there's only so many times I can repeat myself regarding its combat. It's just incredible what From Software did with Sekiro. This game is proof that From Software doesn't need Dark Souls styled combat to make an intensive, engaging, and satisfying experience. Other games like the Devil May Cry series and Ninja Gaiden Black were already causing broken controllers long before Demon Souls ever became a thing. Sekiro was a brave step towards a different path and also a return to form experience for character action game fans. I still love the Souls games and Souls-likes in general, but after the Elden Ring DLC, I feel like From Software need to move on from the formula, and Sekiro, Bloodborne, and Armored Core 6 were a good change of pace that was really needed in a genre that is progressively getting more stale. Time will tell in the future, and I'll always tune in for whatever From Software does next. In the meantime though, I'll still dabble into Sekiro and redo fights or experiment with different challenges or other ways to make the game more enjoyable or harder, but that's all I really have to say about the game for now. While I do like the dedication and respect it gives to its Japanese roots, its dense and tight level design, and its interesting characters and story, the star of the game is undoubtedly its combat.